The unexpected "we need to talk" bombshell dropped on a Sunday evening as we were preparing to turn in for the night. I shouldn't have been taken aback, really, considering Maggie, my wife of 4 years, had been exhibiting odd behavior all weekend. Despite my inquiries about her well-being, she insisted she was fine, albeit burdened with thoughts weighing heavily on her mind. In all honesty, I was grappling with my own share of concerns. The aftermath of the Great Recession had sent both of our careers into a tailspin, turning our once promising financial situation into a struggle to make ends meet. It wasn't just us. Our peers were facing similar challenges. Unlike me, though, Maggie seemed particularly resistant to accepting our financial downturn. Having grown up with less, she had grown accustomed to the luxuries we once indulged in, like our annual vacations. While she never explicitly pointed fingers at me, hints of blame lingered in her remarks whenever our finances were discussed. As I embraced Maggie, expressing my love for her, her response was devoid of reciprocation. Instead, she did something entirely uncharacteristic, pouring herself a strong shot of scotch without offering me one. It was evident she had something significant, likely unpleasant, to share, and she was steeling herself to broach the subject. After dinner, the evening passed in silence as we sat in front of the TV. I couldn't tell you what programs aired. My mind was preoccupied with concern for my wife. Without tuning into the news, we headed upstairs, a routine that typically signaled an intimate moment between us. However, tonight diverged from the norm. In fact, for the past 3 weeks, intimacy had eluded us, a victim of the economic strain we faced. As I finished brushing my teeth, she entered the bathroom and dropped a bombshell. Someone from work invited me on an all-expenses-paid ski trip to Colorado. One person had to cancel, and the tickets are non-refundable. We're leaving Wednesday morning, and I'll return on Monday. Rinsing my mouth, I couldn't help but comment, "Someone from work." That's an interesting way to put it. It leads me to believe it was a man who extended the invitation. Maggie appeared stricken with guilt. "I believe you just answered my question. So, who is this man from work who invited you, a married woman, on vacation?" I endeavored to maintain composure. "You don't know him." "I thought I was familiar with everyone you work with." "You are, but I don't directly work with him." "Now you've lost me. You mentioned someone from work." "No, I said someone at work." "All right, let's not resort to Bill Clinton-esque semantics. Who's the individual who invited you on vacation?" "He's someone I met in the office cafeteria. His office is on the 5th floor, and we've had lunch together a few times." I struggled to keep my emotions in check, but my voice resonated through the room. "How long has this affair been going on?" Maggie began to cry. Amidst her sobs, she protested, "I would never betray you. How could you say something so hurtful?" "Perhaps because you neglected to mention your lunch dates with another man, or the fact that you've become such close friends that he invited you, a married woman, on a skiing trip to Colorado. And it's been nearly a month since we've been intimate. I believe that covers it." "It's not what you think. He's genuinely a nice guy, but his girlfriend recently broke up with him, and he doesn't want to waste the prepaid ticket. Everything from the hotel to the lift tickets is already covered. It won't cost me a thing." "How convenient. Now, what's his name?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Joseph." "Does Joseph have a last name?" "Brown or Bryant, something along those lines. You've got me so flustered, I can't remember." "So, you're planning to fly across the country with a man whose name you can't even recall. You're either having an affair with him or you're being incredibly foolish." The argument escalated in volume and intensity. At some point, I inquired, "Who exactly are these friends you'll be sharing the cabin with?" "They're friends of Joseph's. There are 2 other couples." "2 other couples, which means you're essentially going as his date." "No, I keep telling you, he just doesn't want to waste the non-refundable ticket." "So, he's asked a married woman to accompany him." "Why can't you trust me? Would you trust me if I said I met a woman in the cafeteria who invited me on vacation?" "Yes." "That's nonsense. Remember how jealous you got when I was simply explaining the infield fly rule to that woman sitting beside us at Wrigley Field last summer? You started a fight with her, and we got thrown out of the ballpark by the ushers." That was different. You were ignoring me. Oh, and you won't be ignoring me when you're holed up in a cabin with Joseph and 4 complete strangers, I retorted. Maggie let out a scream before storming out of the room. The night stretched on endlessly, filled with restless tossing and turning. Eventually, around 2 in the morning, exhaustion overtook us both. By 6, I was already up, brewing a pot of coffee. Maggie joined me, taking a sip before dumping the contents down the sink. "I'm heading to work," she announced. I knew Maggie's stubbornness well. When she dug her heels in, admitting fault was out of the question. She was perhaps the most obstinate person I had ever met. During a drive to work, I contemplated how to salvage our relationship. Logic wouldn't suffice this time. It called for a more drastic approach, as my grandmother would say. Around a year ago, I had taken a chance by hiring Nick, a street-smart young man with a criminal past. He often reminded me of his gratitude for giving him a second chance. "You name it, boss, and I'll do it," he would say. I decided it was time to cash in on that favor. "Nick, I need your help. Whatever it is, just say the word." I laid out my dilemma for Nick. "You want me to rough him up?" "Maybe later, but first I need his name and place of work." I handed Nick a photo of my wife and the address of her office building. "There's a cafeteria in the basement where she goes for lunch every day at noon. I need you to discreetly snap a photo of Joseph. Once he's done eating, follow him upstairs and find out where he works. Get me the name of his employer." "Understood, boss. And when it's time to leave, tail him and get the license plate number of his car." "You can count on me, boss. And Nick, don't fret, I'll make sure your time card is taken care of." I constantly checked my watch, convinced that Maggie would rendezvous with her paramour to discuss my supposed unreasonableness. The day progressed like any typical Monday, buried under heaps of work with time moving at a snail's pace. At 1:10, my phone chimed. "Boss, it's me." I've got the picture. They were deep in conversation, but I couldn't get close enough to eavesdrop. Afterward, I trailed him to the elevator. He didn't acknowledge my presence. I followed him off and pretended to search for a room number. He slipped into 510. The sign read Anderson Metallurgy Supplies, LLC. "Nick, excellent work, but you're only halfway there." "Don't worry, boss, I'll shadow him like a ghost." "Send me the picture." As soon as I ended the call, Google filled my screen. Typing in Joseph Brown, I wasn't overly hopeful. I found numerous matches for the name, but none resembling the man in the photo. Trying Bryant yielded no results either. I then searched for Anderson Metallurgy Supplies, LLC, discovering they were a major supplier of powdered metals to the industry. Despite my efforts, I couldn't find any employee names or photos. I dialed the listed number and inquired about Joseph Brown. "There's no one here by that name." "My apologies, I must have made an error. I meant Joseph Bryant." "No one by that name works here either. Are you sure you have the correct company?" "I must have dialed incorrectly. Apologies for the confusion." Staring at the computer screen, I pondered how to uncover the identity of that individual when my phone rang once more. "Boss, it's me." Right after we hung up, I slipped into the men's room for a smoke. Guess who followed me? Bryant Brown, but none of those names are his real one. "Did he spot you?" "Nah, I was in the stall about to light up when he walked in." I kept an eye on him through the gap between the wall and the door. He took a leak but didn't bother washing his hands. On his way out, a guy around my age greeted him as Mr. Bennett. Bryant didn't say a word, so I waited until the other guy left and asked, "Hey, was that Joseph Bryant?" He just shook his head and said, "Nope, that's Lester Bennett." "Sounds like a real piece of work. You can say that again." He bummed a cigarette off me, and I headed outside. "Nick, you make a hell of a spy." "Thanks, boss." Unfortunately, I got pulled into a logistics meeting that ran right up until quitting time, so I couldn't do any further digging. That would have to wait until morning. As I was maneuvering my car into the garage, Nick rang up. He exited the elevator a few minutes before 3, and I trailed him across the parking lot to the subway station. The train was packed, so I hung around the other end of the car with a group of Spanish-speaking Mexicans. Bennett seemed wary of us. He clutched his briefcase tightly, as if he thought we might snatch it. He got off at Logan Square, and I followed him home. He resides in the basement apartment of a 2-story building, about a block off the boulevard. The address is 2366 North Kimball Avenue. There are burglar bars on the windows, but no curtains, so I could see inside. It's quite run down. With nothing else to do, I lingered in the nearby gangway to see if he made any other stops. About 10 minutes later, he emerged with a stack of pizza boxes, tossing them into the garbage cart. Then he returned with 2 hefty garbage bags. Once he went back inside, I seized both bags. That's how my associates typically steal identities. People discard a lot of valuable stuff. Boss, I couldn't find any trace of Brian Brown, but I did uncover a slew of legal documents indicating his name is Lester Bennett. Nick, that's excellent work. I can't discuss this any further right now. We'll debrief tomorrow. Got it, boss. Armed with this newfound information, an idea sparked in my mind. I entered the house and discovered Maggie enjoying a hamburger and fries at the kitchen table. It seemed she hadn't thought to get anything for me. Disregarding the oversight, I took a seat opposite her. For us to have a rational discussion, I insist on a few things. Maggie began, but I interrupted her, requesting her patience until I finished speaking. I'm not oblivious. I remember how you framed your vacation announcement to suggest you were going with a female colleague. So now, it's time for complete transparency. I require Joseph's last name, address, email address, cell phone number, and workplace details. Additionally, I'll need copies of the plane tickets and the address of the mountain chalet he rented. In the unfortunate event something were to happen to you, I wouldn't want to be clueless about your whereabouts or companions. Don't exaggerate, Maggie interjected. I halted her once more. I'll speak first, then you. It always irked my wife when I didn't allow her to talk over me. I also need the names and phone numbers of the other couples. Now you may respond. He didn't rent the chalet. It's owned by his uncle. And Joseph doesn't own the cell phone. What do you mean? Even 5-year-olds have cell phones. Practically everyone does. Well, he doesn't. So, if I provide you with all of this, will you stop pressuring me and let me enjoy myself? Her face lit up with a hopeful smile. You have one day to gather everything. Why don't you just admit you're jealous because I'm going to Colorado? I slammed my fist on the table. I'm not jealous. I'm furious because throughout our entire relationship and the 4+ years of marriage, you never once mentioned a desire to go skiing anywhere. Now, suddenly, you're adamant about going skiing in Colorado with some guy you barely know from the cafeteria. And you're surprised I suspect you're having an affair. I swear I'm not, she screamed. Get me the information. If it checks out, then we'll talk. I was tempted to reveal that her boyfriend had given her a false name, but I wanted to gauge Bennett's reaction first. We slept as far apart as the queen-size mattress would allow, but surprisingly, Maggie was civil the next morning, and we even shared coffee together. I arrived early at the office, pacing anxiously until Nick showed up. With tomorrow being Maggie's departure date, this was my final chance to salvage my marriage. Nick brought in a large cardboard box. He had sifted through the bags, discarding actual garbage and preserving everything else: financial records, bank statements, and certified mail from a law firm. He tore the envelopes in half, thinking it would deter identity theft. I pieced together anything that seemed important and organized them, Nick explained. The first item he handed me was a legal-sized envelope addressed to Lester Bennett, sent via certified mail. That scumbag is being taken to court for failing to pay child support. He's got 2 young kids, and he hasn't contributed a cent in over a year. The following item was a bench warrant for failure to appear for non-payment of child support. Nick elaborated, the police are so swamped they won't even bother coming to your house to pick you up. Instead, they input your name into the database. If you have any interaction with law enforcement, even for a minor infraction like a traffic violation, they'll haul you off to jail. So, I suppose I'll need to orchestrate an encounter with Chicago's finest, I remarked dryly. Nick chuckled. That's a solid plan, boss. Next in the stack were overdraft notices and checks stamped NSF. He received a barrage of notices from the bank before they finally closed his account, Nick reported. Saving the juiciest piece for last, Nick handed me a printout of the airline reservations. It's peculiar. His ticket is round trip, but your wife's is only one way. That's troubling, I muttered. Boss, with the record identifier, you can cancel the tickets, Nick suggested. I had another idea. I would separate the lovebirds by altering Bennett's seat assignment to the rear of the plane and purchasing the newly vacant one for myself. After scrutinizing all the documents, I delved into the archives of the Chicago Tribune and uncovered the reason behind Bennett's use of a false identity. Shockingly, he was a convicted rapist. Although the assault took place in Denver, Bennett was a Chicago native, and all three major newspapers ran the story alongside his mugshot. While the details were scarce due to a plea agreement to spare the victim from trial, it was evident it was him. He pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of sexual assault and received a 24-month sentence. During his stint in prison, his wife filed for divorce, severing ties with him. A visit to the sex offender registry confirmed his residential address and cautioned about his early release after serving just 14 months due to prison overcrowding. Upon release, his first act was to track down his ex-wife and viciously assault her, leaving her hospitalized for nearly a month. With 2 felony convictions under his belt, my wife somehow viewed him as a decent individual. I took an early lunch break and headed to the courthouse to purchase a copy of Bennett's divorce decree, with photocopying fees amounting to 25 cents per sheet. Alongside the divorce filing, I obtained a copy of his rape arrest warrant. It revealed the chilling details of how he drugged and assaulted a young woman during a skiing trip. Further, I researched do-it-yourself divorce filings at the law library, discovering a comprehensive template online. I filled it out, citing adultery as grounds, and appended time-stamped photos of Bennett and my wife engaged in intimate conversation in the cafeteria for a solid hour, akin to 2 lovers deeply engaged. My final destination was the Circuit Court of Cook County Domestic Relations Division, where I formally filed my petition for dissolution of marriage. I had 3 copies made, each bearing the official seal and a stamped case number. Informing my supervisor of my need for a few personal days off, he didn't inquire further, showing understanding and support. Upon returning home, I found Maggie preparing dinner, a genuine home-cooked meal rather than something from a package. It seemed like her effort to lift my spirits. I embraced her and planted a kiss, though her response wasn't as enthusiastic as I hoped. Still, any sign of affection was welcome. Maggie then retrieved a folded piece of paper from her purse. Here, I gathered everything you asked for. Joseph Brown doesn't have a phone, but I managed to get his email address. He's also active on Facebook. Where does he work? I inquired. He recently got a promotion and hasn't received his new business cards yet, she explained casually. I stared at her incredulously, puzzled by her lack of concern. And oddly enough, he couldn't recall the name of his employer. Opening my laptop, I navigated to Google Maps, inputting the chalet's address. Strike 1. Then I attempted the official Denver zoning map. Strike 2. Despite trying various mapping programs, including the assessor's webpage, all yielded the same result. The address didn't exist. He must have made an error, perhaps transposed a digit, Maggie offered. What about the tickets? I pressed. He mentioned we'll collect them at the airport. No, you received the boarding pass at the airport. You should know that from our trip to Maui, I reminded her. I dialed the phone numbers provided for the other 2 couples, but neither connected to a working line. Online searches for their names also turned up empty, and I found no trace of them on Facebook. Honey, I hate to break it to you, but none of the information provided by Brown, if that's even his real name, checks out. There's no way I'm allowing you to go. Naively, I hoped she would acknowledge the suspicious nature of Brown's actions. Instead, before I knew it, my dinner, still sizzling in the frying pan, was flung across the room, shattering against the wall. It was a shame, as it had smelled delicious. You're not letting me, she screamed. Who do you think you are to dictate where I can go? Your husband. Why are you being so unreasonable? I'm simply going skiing with a friend. With a man who has deceived you at every turn. You don't even know where you're headed. He didn't deceive me. Maybe he's trying to protect us from your interference. Is he afraid I'll crash your rendezvous and spoil his seduction? Maggie snapped. Spit flew from her mouth as she shouted, "Stop saying that. We're just friends. I'm going skiing, and you can't stop me. If you want to go skiing, fine. I'll take us skiing." You? With what money? We're broke, remember. I have 2 mayonnaise jars filled with silver coins that I've been saving since my teenage years. I intended to use them for a getaway on our 5th anniversary. Now I'll cash them in, and the choice is yours. We can either use the money for a vacation together or for legal fees with a divorce attorney. It's up to you. Stop trying to intimidate me. I'm not trying to intimidate you. I'm making a solemn promise, and you know I always keep my word. I don't understand why you don't trust me. You're a beautiful woman. Brown has proven himself to be less than honorable by not respecting your husband's objections to his wife going on vacation with him. I already told you he's only taking me because the ticket is non-refundable. I'll reimburse him for the ticket and still have enough left for us to go skiing. It's too late. We're leaving tomorrow morning, and I have no way to contact him. Maggie, I'm not naive. I will never allow myself to be cuckolded by you. Any man who would permit his wife to do what you're planning isn't a real man. Think about how you'll explain to your parents, family, and friends why we're getting divorced. Don't give me that. I promised I would return relaxed and make it up to you. Please, I'm begging you. It's not too late to salvage our marriage. I already told you I can't cancel. I gave Joseph my word, and it's too late for him to find someone else. So you're willing to uphold your promise to a proven liar at the expense of the vow you made in front of God and all our loved ones. I keep telling you, nothing inappropriate will happen. It doesn't matter if nothing happens. You've made your choice. You've prioritized him over our marriage. That night, I slept on the couch, listening to Maggie's tears from the bedroom. My mind wrestled with conflicting emotions. The rational part urged me to let her face the consequences and revel in victory when the inevitable occurred, while my heart pleaded for me to be the knight in shining armor and rescue our marriage. I battled through a sleepless night, torn between what I desired. Ultimately, I reached a compromise. Before dawn, I was already up. Maggie ignored me, her annoyance evident when I snapped a photo of her with my phone. "Why did you do that?" she demanded. "So the authorities will have a recent photo in case they need to identify your body." She responded with a barrage of profanities. As she packed her suitcase in the bedroom, I entered and delivered my ultimatum. If you board that plane with him, I won't be here when you return. Our marriage will be over. She shot me a disdainful glance and retorted, "I know you're not that foolish." Funny, I thought the same about you. I guess we were both mistaken. Without kissing her goodbye, I exited the house. Parking my car a block away, I observed her departure before returning indoors to shave off my distinctive beard and mustache. Dressed in my somber black suit, white shirt, and narrow black tie, what my wife often dubbed my funeral attire, an apt metaphor for the death of our marriage, I completed the look with a pair of sunglasses. Grabbing my briefcase and a couple of suitcases containing my belongings, I embarked on my final gamble. Arriving at the gate, I received a call from Nick a few minutes after 8. He was stationed outside Bennett's basement apartment. "Boss, you won't believe this. They had a heated argument. Your wife wanted to drive to the airport, but the guy insisted on taking the subway, claiming it was cheaper. She even offered to cover parking costs, but he refused, stating they'd need the money in Colorado. I took a peek into her wallet while she was in the restroom. She had less than $100. I hope she didn't plan on using our joint credit cards, because I canceled them right after purchasing my ticket. I wished I could read Maggie's thoughts as she struggled with her bags down the stairs into the dim underground maze that Chicagoans call the subway. The Blue Line train would likely be packed with commuters heading to work. Nick found it odd that a man flying to Denver for skiing in December didn't have a proper winter coat or even gloves as they were bumped around by the crowd. Maggie's much-anticipated vacation was already facing turbulence. The journey to the airport took a little over half an hour. Nick discreetly followed them into the terminal, where he observed Bennett printing out their boarding passes. Thankfully, Bennett didn't scrutinize the passes closely, so he didn't notice the last-minute change I made to his seat assignment just before purchasing my own ticket. Nick called again to report that they had reached the TSA checkpoint, beyond which he couldn't follow. "Thanks for everything. You've been a tremendous help," I acknowledged. At the X-ray machine, Maggie's carry-on bag drew the screener's attention. "Please step over here, Mom," he instructed. Soon, a TSA agent was meticulously inspecting her belongings, eventually discovering the corkscrew I had surreptitiously placed in the inside zipper pocket during my earlier examination of her bags. To my relief, there was nothing remotely provocative inside. The TSA agent reprimanded her and confiscated the corkscrew. The timing had to be impeccable for my plan to succeed. I had paid for early boarding and secured one of the first seats on the plane, opting for a center seat. My wife was assigned the window seat. I decided to offer her a second chance by leaving the aisle seat vacant, hoping she would sit beside me so I could present her with my evidence. Luck seemed to be on my side when a well-built young man, likely a college athlete, judging by his buzz cut, occupied the aisle seat just minutes later. Gradually, the rows ahead of us filled up as passengers boarded the plane. The stragglers frantically searched the overhead bins for space to stow their carry-on bags. A couple of minutes later, the chaos ensued. "Hey, you're in my seat, asshole." Bennett thrust his ticket in my seatmate's face. Maggie had been struggling to fit her suitcase into the overhead compartment and turned back when she heard the commotion. The man in the aisle seat calmly replied, "Check the row number. Your seat is further back, near the bathrooms." Bennett erupted into a tirade filled with profanity, berating the airline for its incompetence. He concluded with, "Move your fat ass to the back of the plane and let me sit next to my girlfriend." Maggie heard him refer to her as his girlfriend but didn't object. Instead, she suggested, "Joseph, since he's unwilling, perhaps you should ask the gentleman in the middle to switch seats." Without my beard and mustache, she didn't recognize me immediately, especially with the aid of sunglasses. By this time, a flight attendant had made her way through the crowd, and the purser emerged from the aft galley to investigate the disturbance. Glaring at Bennett, the flight attendant insisted he take his seat so that they could complete the boarding process. "This flight is fully booked. Please take your assigned seat, and we'll see if we can accommodate any changes after takeoff," the flight attendant interjected firmly. "I paid to sit next to my girlfriend," Bennett exclaimed, brandishing his ticket. It was then that Maggie finally realized I was occupying the center seat. "What are you doing on my plane? You orchestrated this. You're humiliating me," she accused me, her voice tinged with anger and embarrassment. "I'm humiliating you? You're a married woman, and this guy is referring to you as his girlfriend," I retorted. "He only said that to convince him to change seats," Maggie snapped, her tone dripping with venom. She moved into the empty row ahead of me, continuing her outburst, "You bastard. I knew you would ruin my vacation. I hate you. I hate being married to you." I braced myself for her anger, but I wasn't prepared for what she said next. It felt like a dagger through my heart. My world shattered. I had lost her. Grabbing my briefcase, I moved to leave the plane, ready to accept the finality of it all. But then something unexpected occurred. Bennett thrust the ticket in my face, and without thinking, I snatched it from him. My voice quivered as I demanded, "Tell me whose name is on this ticket." I held it out for her to see. Her expression shifted to confusion. "Joseph, who is Lester Bennett?" He lunged forward, seizing the ticket and crumpling it into his pocket. "No one," he snapped. "Sir, please take your seat," the purser interjected firmly, growing impatient. Bennett confronted her, his voice sharp. "That's my seat, next to my girlfriend. Make him move." The sight of that bastard claiming my wife as his girlfriend jolted me back to reality. Tears streamed down my face as I met my wife's gaze. "Lester Bennett is your boyfriend. He's hiding his real name because the nice guy has an outstanding arrest warrant for non-payment of child support. While he's whisking you away on vacation, he's neglecting his own children. I opened my briefcase and handed her a copy of the bench warrant. You might want to read this. Maggie glanced at the document, her voice trembling. Joseph, what is this? Is it true? While you're at it, ask your boyfriend why he didn't arrange for your return ticket, I added, passing her their trip itinerary, which revealed her one-way ticket. Concern etched on her face, Maggie questioned, Joseph, why don't I have a return ticket? Ignoring her inquiry, Bennett continued arguing with the flight attendant. Are you going to tell me he conveniently forgot to mention his 2-year stint in jail for assaulting his wife so brutally she spent nearly a month hospitalized? I have the evidence. Handing her a couple of photos showing the woman's battered face, I continued, that nice guy did this. Joseph, please tell me this isn't true, Maggie pleaded. Bennett remained silent, preoccupied with berating the head flight attendant and the airline. You better make him move, or else, he threatened. I did some digging with his real name. Take a look at these newspaper articles if you need proof. I handed her several articles, each featuring his mugshot, in case you doubt me. I don't understand, Maggie admitted, clearly bewildered. Surely he mentioned he's a registered sex offender, I exclaimed, breaking the silence in the plane. Let me jog your memory. He persuaded a naive young lady to join him for a ski trip in Colorado. Instead of hitting the slopes, he drugged her, and he and his buddies took turns assaulting her. She managed to escape after a week of captivity. That landed him 4 years behind bars. Jeanette was in tears. Joseph, please tell me that's not true. But Bennett was too preoccupied arguing with the flight attendant to respond. Try Lester. Lester Bennett. That's his real name. It finally seemed to have registered with Bennett, albeit belatedly. I had foiled his plans. Enraged, he screamed, I'm going to kill you, and lunged at me. However, his punch missed me and landed squarely on the flight attendant's face. Chaos erupted in the narrow aisle. My seatmate, as it turned out, was a starting defensive tackle at a Big Ten college. He swiftly intervened, restraining Bennett until the police handcuffed him. The news hailed him as a hero, and the airline rewarded him with a first-class seat upgrade. Bennett soon discovered that assaulting a member of a flight crew is a felony. His explanation to the police that he didn't intend to hit the flight attendant, but was trying to attack his girlfriend's husband, didn't garner much sympathy. I handed Maggie every piece of incriminating evidence I had collected. I swear to God every word I said is the truth. Maggie stared at the pile of documents without uttering a word. It's over. Now, let's go home. I threw my arms open, hoping she would let me embrace her. But instead of responding, she stood in silence, her head bowed, fixated on the floor. Not a single word escaped her lips. And then it got worse. As the police were escorting Bennett off the plane, I heard him screaming over and over, Hey Stevens, I slept with your wife. My eyes pleaded with Maggie to refute his claim, to deny it ever happened. But she turned away in silence. An airline security guard informed Maggie and me that we were being turned over to the Chicago Police Department for our involvement in the altercation. As we were being escorted away, I overheard a flight attendant saying, Let the gate agent know 3 seats just opened up. I silently thanked the heavens. As we passed by, the other passengers stared at us, some clicking pictures with their cell phones. Now Maggie knew the true meaning of humiliation. Throughout her walk of shame, she didn't utter a single word. It seemed like she was still processing what had just transpired. I, too, felt numb. My knees threatened to buckle, and I had to focus hard to keep walking. Despite it all, I managed to hold my head up high. I wanted everyone to know that I had done everything in my power. Everything went according to plan, almost. I had saved Maggie, but lost my wife in the process. The police escorted us to separate rooms for questioning, with Homeland Security also present. I spent the next hour detailing everything I knew about Bennett to the detective. He instructed me to wait, leaving me alone with a cup of stale coffee for the next 2 hours while they contacted their counterparts in Denver. During that time, I paced back and forth, feeling like a prisoner, grappling with the possible demise of my marriage. Was my wife involved with Bennett, or was he orchestrating this to tear us apart? If she wasn't involved, why didn't she deny it? The questions swirled endlessly in my mind. Finally, the detective returned with grave news. They had received a chilling confirmation from Colorado. Your wife had a severe reaction when shown the pictures they sent over of the chalet, a decrepit structure tucked away in an auto salvage yard, and the horrors awaiting her inside. Bennett had 4 accomplices, the infamous 2 couples, waiting at the shack. They had equipped it with restraints and sedatives, intending to incapacitate her upon arrival. We found enough sedatives hidden in his bag to knock out a circus elephant for a week. Upon interrogation, they divulged their sinister plans for their next victim, my wife. It became evident that her fate would have been grim. The detective recounted how all color drained from her face as they confessed their intentions, causing her to faint on the spot. After the detective finished, he asked if I wanted to speak privately with my wife. It wasn't so much a question as a directive. "Yes, sir," I replied. Unlocking my briefcase, I retrieved the divorce petition. The detective's curiosity prompted him to inquire, "What's that?" "It's what I told Maggie I would do if she got on the plane with Bennett," I explained. The detective's tone turned grave. "Have you no compassion? Your wife is shattered, on the brink of despair. She's reeling from the shock of nearly facing death. You orchestrated all of this to save your marriage. Handing her that will only crush her." My resolve remained firm. The part of me that once loved her seemed to have perished. "Right now, you're her hero. You executed a daring plan to rescue her. You're like Liam Neeson in those movies. You can't abandon her now." I broke down. "Even after everything she's done, if Maggie sincerely apologizes, I'll tear these papers up. I promise, but you can't let her know." "You have my word," he assured me. Moments later, he brought my wife into the room. I stole a quick glance at her before she buried her face in her hands. She looked pale and smelled of vomit. Collapsing into the chair, she began sobbing uncontrollably. The detective's stern voice cut through the room. "Mrs. Stevens, in my 29 years as a police officer, what you did ranks as one of the most foolish acts I've ever seen. If anyone ever deserved to be a victim, it's you. You should be thanking God and your husband for every breath you take and every heartbeat you have. You owe him your life." As the door clicked shut behind the detective, the room was enveloped in heavy silence, broken only by my wife's ragged sobs. Not a single word escaped her lips. No gratitude, no remorse, just silence. After what felt like an eternity, I grew weary of waiting for her to speak. "You traded our marriage for a ski trip worth less than $1,500. $1,500. That's the value you placed on our dreams. How can I ever trust you again, knowing you could abandon us for something so trivial?" My plea fell on deaf ears as she remained mute. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I desperately waited for her response. But as the silence persisted, I couldn't bear it any longer. "If you had just said, 'I'm sorry' at any point, I would have torn up this paper, but I can't wait any longer." With a heavy heart, I handed her a copy of the divorce decree. Upon reading it, Maggie let out a piercing scream, prompting the detective to rush back into the room to ensure she was all right. "I've already packed my belongings. Anything I left behind is yours to do with as you please," I announced, relinquishing my keys to our, now her, apartment. Without looking back, I walked away, leaving behind the shattered remains of our marriage. The second story. My wife, Juliet, looked stunning, almost irresistible, if she weren't laced with venom. She sauntered toward the boardroom, blending into the crowd of sycophants who claimed to run Egg Mullet. In reality, they were so far removed from the actual work that they'd hit terminal velocity if they ever stooped that low. Juliet was dressed in a meticulously tailored bespoke suit, with a skirt a bit shorter and a top a bit tighter than the typical business attire. But that was Juliet. She knew how to use her slender legs and perfect figure to her advantage in any meeting. Just not for me, her disillusioned, discarded husband. Not anymore. The group of corpulent men and their sleek, efficient assistants filed into the boardroom and fixed their eyes on me, seated at the far end of the long, polished oak table, where Mr. Harry Williams, the all-powerful chairman, usually held court. Flanking me were Miller and Young on one side and Ward on the other. We were the ambush party, the gang of four. Molly, our stenographer, was already scribbling furiously, documenting every word to complement the recording. "Who the hell are you?" demanded Williams, renowned for his blunt, no-nonsense approach to management. "My name is Dylan Wright, gentlemen." My wife's head snapped around at the sound of my voice. She had been chatting with the marketing director, Reuben Walker something or other, and hadn't noticed me until now. She quickly made her way over. "Dylan, what the hell are you doing here?" "Ah, Mrs. Wright," I said cheerfully. "You're the assistant marketing director, aren't you?" She took a moment to process the situation before responding. "Of course I am." "You know that. Now, you need to leave right now." "Why don't you take a seat, Mrs. Wright?" Although I fail to see why an assistant marketing director is needed at a board meeting. Shouldn't you be busy working, rather than taking an extended lunch and attending a meeting with the board? "Dylan," she hissed, "you're embarrassing me. You need to get out of here right now." "I think I'm far too late to embarrass you, Mrs. Wright, and I need to be here right now. So take a seat and let's see how this plays out." "Dylan, we can talk later at home. Now, get out." She had been whispering with a hiss until that moment. Her last words dramatically increased in pitch and volume. Williams interrupted again. "Someone call security and get these idiots out of here. And let them know someone's losing their job once I find out who let them in." Ward spoke up. "An extraordinary meeting of shareholders is now in session, gentlemen. Security is aware of our presence and our right to be here." "Who the hell are you?" demanded Williams. I never realized he was such a smooth talker. Rising from salesman to sales director to chairman by schmoozing, kissing ass, and backstabbing, it's hard to believe he reached his position using such language. He must have let himself go a bit, judging by his belly. "Thomas Ward, senior partner of Ward, Ward and Young." "And who the hell are they?" Williams was on a roll now. "The company auditors. And you're here because—" "I'm here to ensure the extraordinary shareholders meeting is conducted in accordance with all the rules and regulations of the Companies Act, as amended in 2006 and 2013. Look, I don't know who you jokers are, but whatever you're trying to sell, I'm not buying it. So back off. Get out of my building." "I would remind you, Mr. Williams, that the building is owned by the company, which is in turn owned by the shareholders." "I own the damn shareholders. Now get out, whoever you are, and forbid that idiot from writing it all down." Molly looked up and gave him a sweet smile. Damn, Molly was so pretty, and when she smiled, "Down, boy. Now's not the time." She adjusted her black-framed glasses, pushed a stray lock of dark blonde hair behind her ear, and my stomach did a flip. Man, she was pretty, and those lips. She scribbled busily as Phillips, the CFO, spoke up. "Shareholders' meetings require notification and must be held in a venue that allows all to attend if they wish. This is an extraordinary shareholders' meeting, Mr. Phillips. Molly, could you check if I mentioned that earlier?" "Yes, Mr. Ward. You said, an extraordinary meeting of shareholders is now in session." To which Mr. Williams replied, "Who the hell are you?" "Notices were sent out 2 days ago, gentlemen, as required." "That's nonsense," said Turner, the company secretary. "I haven't received any notification of any such meeting, and I would be the first to know. And yet our records show that the notification by email was received and acknowledged as read." "Not by me, it wasn't," he stated smugly. "Apparently, you haven't been here for 2 days. I believe you've been on a team-building exercise. Strange that it would take place mid-week, but you make the policies." "I make the policies," Williams asserted, "and you can back off? If I say it happens mid-week, then that's how it is." "Of course you're right," said Ward smoothly. "My audit clerks are going through those accounts and receipts for the team-building days right now." I couldn't resist chiming in. "Ooh, have you been a bad putty cat?" "Evans," Williams commanded, "get down there and sort it out. I won't have any randoms wandering in off the street and looking through our financial papers." I noticed that Oscar Evans, the chief financial officer, looked a bit pale. "You all right, Oscar? You look a little under the weather. I'm sure the team-building exercise was conducted properly, not just an excuse to stay in a 5-star hotel, get drunk, and have fun with your assistants. Dallin, Miller put his hand on my arm. What? I protested. I said I was sure it wasn't an excuse for that. He gave me an old-fashioned look. As the legal mind of the group, he had every right to. Mr. Williams, said Ward in his smooth, polished manner that reminded me of Kobayashi from Asterisk, the usual suspects Asterisk. You might want to keep Mr. Evans on hand for the meeting. According to the share register, he owns significant shares and may wish to vote. He votes how I tell him to vote, Williams declared, brooking no argument. The board members and their assistants were still gathered at the far end of the table. Gentlemen, Ward said, please have a seat so we can get to the first order of business on the agenda. There is no goddamn agenda, shouted Williams. I have the agenda right here, I said, pushing a piece of paper forward. I was glad now that Molly had talked me out of writing it in purple crayon, which had been my first instinct, considering how much of a joke this place was. I didn't get an agenda. This meeting is not valid or legal, protested Turner. I nodded to Molly. She pulled her phone from some mysterious place on her seemingly magical body. It had to be magic, given that her clothes looked like she had been dipped in liquid silk. They fit that closely. There were no visible pockets or places to hide a phone. Trust me, I checked. She murmured into the phone, then made it vanish and nodded to us. Williams was still grumbling and threatening to throw us out, but I noticed the urgency had left his warnings. A minute later, a young man in an expensive suit appeared, carrying a laptop. More. If you would open it, Mr. Turner will enter his password. The man opened the laptop and placed it in front of the skinny company secretary, who stared at it, stretched out his hand to the keyboard, and then paused. Mr. Turner, said Miller, I suggest you refrain from doing anything foolish. Mr. Moore would be obliged to prevent that, which could be unfortunate. Everyone in the room suddenly became acutely aware that Mr. Moore was much more menacing than an audit clerk should be, all without moving a muscle. It was quite impressive. Turner entered his password and opened his emails. When he went a little paler and began to sweat, I knew he'd found the notice. The notification was also posted on the company bulletin board as required and in the national newspapers. Not that it was strictly necessary, as we also have written agreement to short notice. Sure, here's the rewritten version. The email was fake. A friend of mine had tampered with it, making the date and time appear to be 2 days ago instead of 2 hours ago, and also making it seem as if it had been read and acknowledged. Don't ask me how. I just have resourceful friends. However, the notice board posting and the newspaper ad were real. I should have mentioned that the ad was quite small and placed among the classified ads on the back page of a newspaper with the smallest circulation we could find, definitely not one that business people typically read. The notice board was in the canteen of a small branch of the company in Scotland. It took some serious thinking to come up with that one. It was pushing the limits, but it was legal. Ward tapped the table. All right, gentlemen, if you're ready, we can begin. Mr. Wright, would you please read the first item on the agenda? I stood up, adjusted my jacket, and fastened the lowest button. My suit was cheap, but it looked like the more expensive ones. I then adjusted my tie and cleared my throat. All eyes were on me, even Juliet's, though she seemed furious and reluctant to look at me. Thank you, Mr. Ward. Gentlemen, the first item on the agenda is a motion of no confidence in the board of this company and the immediate replacement of all board members. There was a moment of silence before chaos erupted, reminiscent of a bar during a cup final game. Some were laughing uproariously, others were roaring angrily, and some were squealing in disbelief. It was more like a scene from Animal Farm. My wife looked so embarrassed by my behavior that she couldn't even glance in my direction. She was slumped in her seat, trying to make herself as inconspicuous as possible. Any discussion of item 1, gentlemen? What's to discuss? Roared Williams, staring directly at me. I know you. You're Wright's shit-shoveling husband, the bricklayer. Maybe instead of just using your muscles, you should have used your brain and taken some advice from her. She knows what she's doing, and she's really good at it too. He waggled his eyebrows suggestively as he looked around the room, and his colleagues followed suit, smirking at Juliet and me. If her affair had been a secret before, it wasn't anymore. She was exposed. Red-faced and on the verge of tears, she shrank even lower in her chair. You idiots may have set this up, but you clearly have no idea how a business works. This is a limited company with shares sold on the stock market, not some turkey farm out past the M25. You don't get any say in the running of this business, my business. Now be a good boy and back off. Get out of my face. Your talk of agendas was amusing at first, but now you're just pissing me off. Ward didn't flinch. Any other discussion on the first item on the agenda? When all he got were sneers and laughter from the 12 board members and snickers and disdain from the assistants behind them, he held his silence for a moment. Then let's proceed with the vote on the motion that all the board members of Acme Limited be dismissed and replaced immediately. All in favor? I raised my hand. William sneered. You? Do you even have shares? I nodded, and Juliet looked at me in shock. How many? Williams asked. 100 shares, I replied, bought and paid for. Juliet looked down at her lap again, the humiliation of being associated with me evident. 100 shares amounted to less than 1/100%. I was the village idiot at the country's finest university, compared to the businessmen she interacted with daily. She was an eager acolyte learning from the masters, while I wasn't even smart enough to clean up after them. I saw her slip her wedding ring off her finger and put it in her pocket. It didn't make me sad, just surprised at how little I cared. Molly smiled at me, and I wrinkled my nose at her playfully. She liked that, and her smile grew wider. Williams burst into laughter. 100 shares. What's that worth? £2. Ward continued calmly, those against the motion. The laughter persisted. If there are no votes against. Phillips suddenly sobered. I vote against. What? Williams guffawed, wiping his eyes. Are you serious? The vote was about to go against us. He voted his 100 shares, and no one was opposing him. Williams quickly sobered up and stared at me, his bushy eyebrows furrowed in a frown. You sneaky little rat, you orchestrated the entire scheme. This was your plan all along, and you nearly trapped us, laughing the whole way. Very clever. Well, I own 83 million shares, and I vote against this proposal. Now get out of here and take your lackeys with you. If you ever set foot in this building again, I'll have you locked up so tight you'll squeak every time you breathe. A small forest of hands went up, voting against the motion. Things were looking grim for the opposing team. Ward carefully noted each vote, cross-referencing them with the share register to determine the number of shares each voter held. That brings us to a total of just under 242 million shares against the proposal. With 27.62% of all issued shares voting against, the proposal is accepted. Get out of my building, you piece of... What do you mean, accepted? Turner stood up, shouting at Ward. Wait, what? Gasped Williams. I thought he meant rejected. No, Mr. Williams. I was clear. The motion has passed. The room erupted with protests and denials, replacing the previous laughter and jeering. Listen, Warrington, or whatever your name is, you can't just declare something and make it true. Of course not, Mr. Williams. I'm well versed in business procedure, better than any of you. In fact, I know exactly what I'm saying. Good, then speak plainly, because right now you're talking out of your ass, you bastard. Mr. Williams, the numbers are straightforward. 27.62% of the shares, those owned by the people at this table, voted to reject the motion. Meanwhile, 58.98% of the shares voted to accept it. Therefore, the motion is passed. I can't make it any simpler. What? Williams retorted. How do you get 58% out of 100 shares? You don't, Mr. Williams. You wouldn't even get 1% out of 100 shares in this context. Remember, this is a public company traded on the stock exchange. There are nearly 1 billion shares in total. So where does the 58% come from? I stood up again. It comes from proxies, Mr. Williams. These proxies allow me to exercise the voting rights of other shareholders. I've used them to vote all of you corrupt, deceitful individuals out, and I just succeeded. Julie was now staring at me with wide-eyed bewilderment. How on earth did I know about something like proxies? I was a builder, not a financier. Where would I have even heard the term? Williams was also staring at me in shock. You can't have that many proxies. It's impossible. Ah, but I do, Williams. I simply asked for them, and they were entrusted to me. Just for this one meeting. For one day. That would have cost you millions. No, it was about knowing whom to talk to. And truth be told, most of them really don't like you. It had taken weeks of effort. Ever since I had overheard two board members conversing in the executive restrooms while I was up in the ceiling hunting down a leak. Juliet had arranged the job as a way to assuage her guilt, I suppose. That right bitch is so fine, one of them said. I believe it was Baker, the sales director. There's only one right in this town who fits that description, so I knew exactly who they were talking about. Besides, the fact that she worked just one floor down made it obvious. You think Williams is going to share her ass at the next team building event? Asked the other board member, likely Juliet's immediate boss. He likes to keep her under his wing, where he can sleep with her to his heart's content. Although it's been over 2 years, so maybe he's already tired of her. Perhaps he will share it with her this year. I thought he'd be generous at the Christmas party, but the bastard didn't go for it. He dragged her under the table and she entertained him while her husband was looking for her. Greedy asshole. More like tucked under his beer belly, he scoffed. I'm amazed she hasn't ended up flat as a pancake by now. Laughter erupted beyond the bathroom stall. I listened to the sound of 2 zippers being pulled up and the door swinging open and shut as they left. Wash your hands, you filthy pigs, I muttered after them. My head was spinning. I imagined what it would feel like to topple sideways and crash through the flimsy ceiling tiles. Part of me wished for it, hoping maybe it would dull the ache inside. Everything was becoming clear now. I'd had my suspicions for a while. A certain shift in her demeanor had set alarm bells ringing. Once suspicion takes hold, it festers and grows. I noticed subtle changes in her clothing, particularly her underwear. She started taking phone calls in another room. Our bedroom activities became erratic, infrequent, then excessively frequent, and then infrequent again. Classic signs. But I had been scouring the wrong social circle for the culprit. Julie was a stunning woman with long, flowing black hair and curves that could make any head turn. She always dressed immaculately, never sparing any expense on her looks. Julie never shortchanged herself, that much was certain. I assumed she would seek someone equally impressive, someone who matched her high standards. I felt a twinge of guilt for those thoughts, having never considered that betrayal might come from her. I had been looking at the wrong page in the infidelity playbook. I envisioned her with a handsome, flashy man of substantial prowess, not a small, self-important terrier of a man. It's been over 2 years since that old fool lured her away from me, and I've been grieving ever since. Losing the bond of marriage, even one on its last legs, can be devastating. I wallowed in self-pity for a while, then anger flared up, leading me to consider all sorts of drastic, illegal acts of revenge. Eventually, I shook off the haze of irrational thoughts and began to think more clearly. I spoke with a friend who handed me a couple of small plastic gadgets and explained their use, which I diligently recorded. The following day, armed with my toolkit, I returned to the building to investigate that elusive drip. My process included discreetly inserting the gadgets into unattended laptops and pressing the buttons as per my notes. While the devices did their work, I made noise around the office, whistling loudly and cursing the supposed leak, all to avoid suspicion while I searched. It's always wise to conceal your actions in plain sight. Once done, I retrieved the gadgets and exited whistling. One of the perks of building homes for people is the interesting array of personalities you encounter, and the friendships you can forge through fairness, respect, and a bit of humor. Another friend analyzed the data from the gadgets, leading me on a convoluted path to Mr. Ward, who then introduced me to Miller and Young. Our extended discussion at a bar provided me with the solution, albeit in cryptic hints. Eventually, I tracked down the person I needed to talk to and directly posed my question. She listened, initially appearing sympathetic, but grew concerned when I showed her the data. After outlining my plan, she laughed and gave me what I needed. She managed a substantial pension fund and feared that Acme's current board would tank the stock price, jeopardizing her significant investments. She also connected me with the next key individual. By meticulously explaining the what, how, when, and why of my plan, nearly everyone on my list, hedge funds, pensions, mutual funds, and bank investments, contributed to the solution, each motivated by different reasons. Some saw profit in it, given they now knew the timing. Some shared my disdain for Harry Williams, while others acted out of spite or simply because they were moved by my story. Surprisingly, none leaked the information, keeping it under the radar. In the end, I secured proxies for more than half of the company's shares. I had requested a meeting, and they had granted me an entire day. That day is today. "You're all fired," I declared. "Molly, please notify security to be ready to escort these individuals off the premises once the meeting concludes." A giggle escaped Molly's lips as she made exaggerated googly eyes at me from behind her glasses, swiftly working the phone. Within a minute, security guards appeared, looming outside the boardroom door, ready for their task. The room fell silent, punctuated only by occasional panicked whispers. The savvier assistants had subtly distanced themselves from their bosses, seeking to disassociate themselves now that their benefactors were out of a job. Julie eyed me as if I might suddenly sprout fangs, and I relished her fear. A little retribution was just the appetizer. The main course was yet to be served. "What's next on the agenda, Mr. Ward?" I asked, fully aware of the agenda, since I had written it myself, but savoring the formality. Item 2 on the agenda: a motion that no golden parachutes be offered to any former members of the Board of Egmont votes in favor. I raised my hand with a broad smile. Votes against. A small forest of hands hesitantly rose. The motion is carried. Okay, last try. I want feeling, rhythm, rhyme, and volume set at 11. Jazz hands wouldn't hurt either. At that, Molly started hiccuping from laughing so hard, and for some strange reason, those high-powered executives did exactly as I asked. I recorded it on my phone for posterity. I then informed them that detailed accounts of their sordid affairs with the assistants and my wife had been sent by couriers to their spouses. Eventually, I told them all to back off. As they scrambled away, shoving each other in their desperate attempt to escape me and the chaos their lives had become, I sighed and sat up. The remaining 3 members of the gang followed the rush in a more composed manner after Young managed to get a dazed Juliet to sign the contract for her CEO position, leaving us almost alone. Molly cupped my chin with her small hand and asked, "Are you all right?" Her low contralto voice sent its usual shivers down my spine, and I nodded in response. "It's almost over," she whispered. "Get your hands off my husband." Juliet's voice snapped me out of my thoughts. She had apparently shaken off her stupor with a vengeance. I stared at my soon-to-be ex-wife in astonishment. What could she possibly be thinking? I had just humiliated and embarrassed her to an extreme degree, nearly pushing myself over the edge as well. Yes, she had wronged me by cheating, but my retaliation had been brutal. Not only did I make a spectacle out of her lovers, but she was now officially written into the records of a public corporation, a document accessible to any shareholder. This meant she would undoubtedly face a barrage of mentions in divorce proceedings and countless lawsuits. And now she had the audacity to get jealous. Was she completely insane? Molly spun around, her usual smile replaced by a steely glare. I could almost hear the metaphorical claws slide out. I had met the beautiful Molly Jones 2 years earlier when I built a charming little cottage for her and her fiancé. It was some of my best work. The exterior was rustic, complete with a thatched roof, picket fence, and a meticulously managed wildflower garden, a perfect blend of chaos and order. Inside, however, was a marvel of modern engineering, featuring Italian ingenuity that allowed almost everything to fold up and disappear into walls and cupboards. Molly, being quite petite, had steps built into the kitchen and other high cupboard areas. These too folded and tucked away seamlessly. Half the time, I expected the whole setup to vanish into itself. It was absolutely brilliant. Her fiancé was tragically killed in a senseless road accident caused by a truck wheel that hadn't been properly secured. The wheel flew off at high speed on the motorway, propelled by the truck's heavy load, and bounced improbably high into the air. When it descended, it smashed into the little sports car he was driving on the opposite side of the median. He never had a chance. A split-second difference could have meant safety, either bouncing behind his car or landing in front of it. Instead, it came down right on him. An 18-wheeler's wheel is massive, lethally so. I attended the funeral, and when she had calmed down a bit, I offered to complete the cottage her fiancé had been building at no charge and sell it for her if she wished. Yet in the throes of her grief, she chose to finish and live in it, turning it into a tribute to her lost love. She dedicated herself to working on the cottage almost daily, navigating her sorrow. Naturally, I was there to assist whenever possible. As time passed, her vision for the cottage evolved. Initially designed as a show house, she decided to transform it into a real home, reflecting the life and comfort they had envisioned together. This led to many discussions, redesigns, improvisations, disagreements, reconciliations, and more redesigns. Over the 6 months it took to perfect the cottage, we became close friends. Not more than that, but certainly no less. She shared her plans of returning to university to complete her degree and embark on a career in medicine, terwijl ik mijn dromen deelt van het kopen van een boot en de wereld over reizen. Thus, when I first suspected Juliet was cheating on me, she was the second person I confided in. Just as I had helped her through her grief, she supported me through mine. She was my shoulder to cry on, my listener for venting anger, and my voice of reason when I had impulses to act rashly. She was always there when I needed her most. Inevitably, as time passed without concrete proof of Juliet's infidelity, my love for Juliet faded and was replaced by deep feelings for Molly. They were polar opposites, making the transition easier for me. Juliet was tall, slim, and exuded sophistication. Molly was short, delightfully curvy, and full of laughter. Juliet had long dark hair and blue eyes. Molly had short blonde hair and brown eyes. Juliet was driven by an insatiable desire to succeed, while Molly lived to enjoy every moment to the fullest. Juliet embodied ambition and ruthlessness. Molly was a warm, reliable companion. While Juliet seemed to pursue any opportunity, even infidelity, Molly remained faithful, with me seemingly the only man in her life after her fiance's death. Juliet was my unfaithful wife, Molly my steadfast friend, my best friend. I was about to ruin everything because I had fallen in love with her. Molly had helped me plan this day. Initially, it was just a fun thought experiment, but gradually, it became a means for me to find closure. I'm not sure Molly ever believed I'd actually follow through, but when the day came, she was resolute in her support. She turned into my de facto secretary for the day. Juliet, however, had misconceptions about the situation. "I've been watching you, rich bitch. I know who you are and where you come from," Juliet screamed. "Do you think you can buy everything? You think you can buy my husband? Well, I've got news for you." She swung at Molly's face, but Molly ducked and kicked her in the shin. Juliet crumpled, clutching her leg. "You bitch," Juliet spat. "Better than being a whore," Molly retorted. Seeing that the immediate danger of a full-blown catfight had passed, I stepped in. I had learned my lesson the hard way about getting in between two infuriated women. It only resulted in scars. If they were driven to violence, they could handle it themselves. I would intervene only when they were too exhausted to hurt anyone, including me. "Juliet, you've been ruining things for many people for 2 years now. It's over." "Please don't say that, Dylan. You love me." I raised my hands in a defensive gesture. No, no, no. That's in past tense. I loved you. Hear that at the end, but you killed that feeling. So now, I don't. "Oh, please," she implored. "You made me chairman. You gave me the best gift ever. Of course you love me. And I'll never cheat again. Ever." Molly leaned in and whispered to me I'd give her a week. At most, I had to agree. It doesn't matter if it's tomorrow or never. We are done. We will never, ever be together again. I overheard two of your friends talking about how long you've been the company slut. Did you seriously play around with that creep under the table at the Christmas party while I was looking for you? Molly placed her hand on my arm, eyes wide. My God, really? I take back my earlier prediction. Maybe a day, and even then, that's being generous. Oh, come on. You knew I was doing it for my promotion. You didn't mind, Juliet cried, tears streaming down her face. What? I never knew you were cheating until 6 weeks ago. I had my suspicions, but I had no proof. No, you knew. You had to know. You just didn't care. What was I supposed to know? I loved you and trusted you wouldn't be unfaithful. But you never said anything. You didn't care. Back off, Juliet, Molly interjected. That's complete nonsense. You're just trying to make him feel guilty. You were sneaky, sleeping around but careful enough so he'd never catch you. You did it in your own world, one he couldn't easily access. He didn't know anything, and that doesn't make him stupid. It just makes you a really conniving cheater. Says the rich woman who couldn't accept her fiance's death and had to buy a replacement, secondhand even. All those little changes to your perfect house, trying to tie him down with money. Face it. Molly's eyes were filled with tears as she stared at me. That wasn't it. I didn't. You didn't tell him you came from a wealthy family with diamonds and pearls. Why? Were you afraid he'd see the real you? Molly started to turn away, and I knew if she ran, I might lose her forever. I grabbed her hand, pulled her close, and held her tightly. Hey, I whispered as she sobbed against my chest. She's trying to find our weak spot and tear us apart. But it's not going to happen. I don't care about your wealth. You're my best friend. This is classic her. She bends reality to suit her needs. How do you think she always got away with her betrayals? She can make anyone believe her lies. I turned back to Juliet, who smirked with triumph. Juliet, you'd better shut your mouth now, or your next words will be, do you want fries with that? I gave you that CEO position, but if you don't stay quiet, I will take it back. I'll give it to Molly. She's an excellent organizer. I glanced down at Molly, who, at 5 feet tall, had a look up at me. She stared at me with alarm through her tears. She didn't want that position any more than I did. Juliet finally detected the truth in my tone. She was desperate to keep her chairmanship and knew I held all the proxies for the day. I had the power to reconvene the meeting and change the agenda, potentially removing her and the rest of her team. Why did you give me the position if you despise me? She asked. Juliet, I don't despise you. I did once, but not anymore. I used to love you, but those feelings have faded. Do you want to know why you got the job? Here's the truth. 6 weeks ago, as I was planning this, I envisioned us divorced. If you lost your job, I would be stuck paying you alimony, funding your lifestyle. That idea was unbearable. But if I promoted you, I thought there might be a chance you'd end up supporting me instead. The idea of you working to support my pleasure seemed like justice, especially given my heart condition, which means I can't work anymore. Molly glanced at me with fear in her eyes. I cupped her face in my hands and gently wiped away her tears with my thumbs. I don't actually have a heart condition, but I could easily get a doctor's note saying I do. I have friends in unusual places. She threw her arms around me, sobbing. I'm sorry, she said, her voice muffled against my chest, but I don't want to be your best friend anymore. Juliet laughed mockingly, but I shot her a venomous look that made her step back. I gestured for her to stay away, and she retreated to the other side of the room. Really? I asked Molly. She nodded, and I felt an overwhelming exhaustion wash over me. I was weary of my emotions, constantly riding the tumultuous waves of hope and fear, never quite blending like oil and water. I'm so sorry, I said softly. I never intended to fall in love with you. I just wanted you to be my best friend. It just happened. I'm sorry I ruined everything. Molly's eyes were wide and brown, staring up at me. You fell in love with me. Yes, and I'm sorry it damaged our friendship. You fell in love with me, she repeated. I realized I might have gone too far. Perhaps I should have kept my feelings to myself. I nodded, feeling a mix of misery and loneliness set in. Why did she keep asking? I don't want to be your best friend, she said thoughtfully. I braced myself for the inevitable rejection. I want to be your best love, your best life, your best wife. And yes, your best friend too, but those first. Her words took a moment to sink in, and when they did, they filled the void with a radiant hope I hadn't felt in a long time. Huh. I couldn't quite process what she had just said. Dallin, right, will you marry me? Okay, but you have to get on one knee to ask me properly. It wasn't the best joke, but I was too exhausted for anything more clever. She obliged, dropping down to one knee. Dallin, will you marry me? Can't hear you now. Come closer. I attempted a smile, though joking about marriage felt off to me, especially at that moment. She stood up again, and suddenly her arms were around my neck, her legs tightly gripping my waist as she hoisted herself up. I staggered back a few steps. I'm going to ask you one last time, Dylan. Just once more, and I mean it. Almost. Maybe. Now listen carefully. I love you, and you said you love me. So will you marry me? You're not joking. No, of course not. Do you think I ask people to marry me as a joke? Why would you think that? I'm not very lucky. Well, say yes, and I promise you'll get very lucky as soon as I get you back home. Yes. She kissed me for the first time then, her glasses going askew in the passion of the moment. Everything felt mixed up and out of order, but I didn't care. It tasted like sunshine, roses, vanilla, autumn mists, warm beach sand, and chocolate, like everything wonderful in my otherwise mundane, tangled life. Ha! I knew it, came a muffled cheer from the far side of the boardroom. Back off, Juliet, Molly, and I said simultaneously. And she did. Maybe my luck was changing after all. The third story. My journey swiftly plummeted from the pinnacle of contentment, being wedded to the town's princess, blessed with 2 delightful children, successfully managing my thriving business, and residing in my cherished hometown, to the abyss of despair within a mere few weeks. I reside in Culverson, a quaint town nestled in the heart of the Midwest. Our community is modest, with a population of only 1,000 residents. The closest urban center, a small city boasting 20,000 inhabitants, sits approximately 60 miles away, with several smaller villages dotting the landscape in between. In our town, we have a handful of essential establishments to serve our needs. There are a couple of convenience stores, reminiscent of a precursor to Walmart, offering a wide array of goods from groceries to toys, clothing, office supplies, and more. For pharmaceutical needs, we have a small pharmacy, alongside a local True Value franchise and a farm store for various supplies. Dining options consist of a couple of cafes, as fast food restaurants are absent in our locale. Financial services are well covered with a large locally owned bank and a small credit union. Amidst these establishments, my computer services business thrives. Primarily focused on IT consulting, I offer hardware solutions like computers, servers, and monitors, catering to clients who seek comprehensive network packages. Among my clientele are esteemed institutions such as the bank, the local hospital, and the school system. My closest competitor operated in the neighboring urban city, yet I still managed to attract clients from there and frequently found myself troubleshooting their networks. But before delving further into my professional life, allow me to introduce myself. I'm John Edwards, 30 years of age, standing at 6 feet tall and weighing in at 180 pounds. Up until recently, I was married to a woman I'd known since middle and high school, Amanda Butler Edwards, though soon to be remarried as our divorce has been finalized. Our union lasted 7 years, which I believed were fulfilling, but evidently, Amanda had a different perspective, blindsiding me with the divorce petition. It's worth mentioning that Amanda and I weren't high school sweethearts. In fact, we scarcely interacted despite attending the same school. Our circles rarely intersected, even in university. Truth be told, I harbored some resentment towards her during those years. She was the quintessential local princess, being the daughter of Wayne Butler, who owned the town's sole bank, Butler Federal Bank. Wayne's bank extended loans to local farmers, the feed store, Mark's Superstore, and nearly every other local business. In our community, face-to-face banking remained the norm, with online banking struggling to gain traction. Even I, with my small operating loan, am indebted to my father-in-law's establishment. Anyway, circling back to Amanda, it wasn't until after we both earned our bachelor's degrees that she suddenly took an interest in me. Admittedly, I had harbored some fantasies about her during her high school years. She was the epitome of the classic blonde bombshell, decent height, weight, with a nice bust and curves, and to top it off, she was the head cheerleader. As for myself, I was quite active in sports, starting as a defensive end in football, playing forward in basketball, running the 1,000 and 2,000 meter races in track, and holding down center field in baseball. Now, Amanda wasn't exactly stuck up, though she might argue against that label if confronted. But she did exude an air of entitlement. In high school, she dated the quarterback, a multi-sport athlete named Simon, who also excelled at basketball and baseball. Simon eventually earned a full-ride scholarship to a different university to play football, which marked the end of their relationship. During our college years, Amanda and I traveled in different circles. She was heavily involved in her sorority, which happened to be the largest on campus, while their corresponding fraternity held the same status. They were constantly hosting events, keeping Amanda occupied outside of classes. On the contrary, I was more of a nerd. Much of my time outside of class was spent delving into hardware, software, and various systems, grappling with the intricacies of computerization. My field of study demanded as much dedication outside the classroom as within it. Moreover, I had to hold down a job to help cover expenses that my modest scholarship didn't fully address. My father served as the manager of Mark's Superstore, earning a modest salary that kept us afloat, albeit just enough to preclude any grants for me. To illustrate the vast difference in our lifestyles, you could quadruple the square footage of my parents' house and still not match the size of Wayne Butler's primary residence. During the summers, Dad and I would frequently embark on camping trips almost every other weekend, finding solace in the simplicity and enjoyment of fishing. Meanwhile, Amanda and her family jetted off to luxurious destinations like Aspen, the Ozarks, Miami, occasional jaunts to Hawaii, and even up to Maine just for leisure. As you can gather, Amanda and I were starkly different individuals who happened to hail from the same small town. When I returned home from school, Amanda suddenly expressed an interest in dating me, almost to the point of seeming like she was stalking me. Frankly, I never quite comprehended her fascination. Yes, I had launched my own business, albeit as a one-man operation at the time. I had secured a small business grant for my startup capital and managed to turn a modest profit in the first year. Eventually, Amanda mustered the courage to ask me to dance one night when we both found ourselves at the same bar with a live band playing. Surprisingly, we clicked well on the dance floor. Thanks to my mother's insistence on learning various dance steps, I didn't embarrass myself too much. As the bar closed for the night, we parted ways with a kiss by her car and my promise to call the next day to arrange a proper date. I grew up as an only child, a result of my mother's medical condition that hindered the normal development of a fetus. I suppose you could say I was a bit of a miracle baby. In contrast, Amanda had a brother who left home at 18 and essentially disappeared, perhaps due to his strained relationship with Wayne. In the year following my graduation, tragedy struck when my father succumbed to a sudden heart attack. My mother recounted how he had been discussing mowing the yard, only for her to later discover something protruding from the small shed door at the back of our property. By then, it was too late. My father had collapsed, and despite the arrival of the ambulance, their efforts to revive him proved futile. He had already passed away by the time my mother found him. Despite our budding relationship, Amanda attended my father's funeral, offering me comfort as we laid him to rest. Her presence by my side at the cemetery, her hand in mine, was a solace amid my tears. Moreover, she displayed remarkable grace towards my mother and the handful of family members who had traveled great distances to support us during our time of grief. Fortunately, my father had ensured that our family home was fully paid off before his passing, and his substantial life insurance policy provided my mother with a steady income for the remainder of her life, provided she managed it prudently. It was a blessing amidst the challenges that lay ahead, which I'll delve into shortly. Contrary to the cliche of a man chasing a woman until she catches him, Amanda and I followed a different path. She pursued me, initiating our dates and our intimate life. While I won't delve into specifics, I'll simply say that we found great compatibility in the bedroom. Our relationship evolved into exclusivity from my perspective, and I hadn't heard any rumors of her seeing other people. We shared intimate moments together 2 or 3 times a week. There were occasions when I had to travel to outlying communities for work. Some of the larger farms sought to integrate their various computer systems, from the tractors and planters to the milking parlors and household computers, all requiring Wi-Fi access. Given the logistical challenges posed by the distance between buildings, my schedule sometimes kept me occupied into the evenings. I'd often wondered if Amanda spent those nights at her parents' house, waiting for my return. I nearly forgot to mention Amanda's job. Due to her major in women's studies, she struggled to find suitable employment in Culverson, so she ended up working for her father. Starting as a teller, she swiftly ascended the ranks to become vice president of the loan department. While her rapid promotion might have been attributed to nepotism, she dedicated herself to the role and diligently educated herself in the intricacies of banking, as her father desired. Reflecting back on those years, I can now see how I was maneuvered into marriage. One evening, just before Christmas, Amanda dropped the bombshell that she was pregnant and demanded to know my intentions. Raised with values instilled by my parents, I immediately proposed marriage. In hindsight, I should have been more skeptical when Amanda and her mother selected a wedding date 7 months after the announcement of our engagement that Christmas. However, by the time I realized the deception regarding her pregnancy, the plans were set and countless invitations had been dispatched. Confronting Amanda, her response was nonchalant. She simply shrugged her shoulders and justified her actions by saying, "If I left it up to you, we would never get married, let alone engaged. I love you, and you love me. This will work." As for myself, I was enamored with the town princess. Our physical chemistry was undeniable, and the thought of sharing a life with Amanda was appealing. So despite uncovering her deceit, I chose to go along with the wedding plans rather than rock the boat. Our wedding became the talk of the town, a grand affair that hadn't been witnessed in Culverson's history. Every soul was invited, and we even scheduled it for a Sunday afternoon to allow businesses to close. The feast was lavish, catered by a firm from our neighboring urban community. Our honeymoon in Barbados was quite the adventure. Amanda discovered a clothing-optional beach, and she relished the freedom of nudity almost every day we were there. Surprisingly, we thoroughly enjoyed ourselves, immersing in all the island had to offer. We explored every nook and cranny on a motor scooter, and we even indulged in snorkeling adventures in the crystal-clear waters of the Caribbean Sea. Upon our return from our 2 weeks of bliss, it was back to the grind. By then, I had expanded my business to include 3 technicians and a secretary/bookkeeper to keep us organized and efficient. However, before our marriage began to unravel, we were a well-oiled machine. About a year into our marriage, Amanda announced her pregnancy, and this time it was the real deal. Our little Jennifer arrived, perfectly formed and destined to be spoiled rotten. She quickly became the apple of my eye. 2 years later, we welcomed our son Oscar, who arrived in much the same fashion, completing our family and filling me with unbridled happiness. However, our 7th year together marked a shift in our relationship. Amanda's work commitments suddenly increased, with numerous evening meetings and weekend hours becoming the norm. While I could understand the occasional banking conference, the frequency of these events seemed disproportionate to the workload. Despite Amanda always being reachable on her cell phone and no signs of missed calls or unusual breathlessness in her responses, I couldn't shake a growing sense of concern. Our intimate life suffered as well, as Amanda was often absent before bedtime. With my own work keeping me occupied and the need to retire early due to early morning customer visits, our time together dwindled. Although I had more assistance with the business, it was primarily to prevent me from burning out. Despite our collective business, I prioritized being home in the evenings, especially considering Amanda's unpredictable schedule with the children. I recall vividly the last time I shared intimacy with my wife. It was a Friday evening, and to my surprise, she had already returned home and prepared a delightful supper for us. The children were ecstatic, chatting away with their mother throughout the meal, so much so that we had to remind them to eat. Afterward, we all pitched in to tidy up the table, loading the pots, pans, and dishes into the dishwasher before settling down together to watch Shrek for what felt like the umpteenth time. The children were overjoyed to have Amanda back, and she had to personally tuck them into bed that night. I was strictly forbidden from entering their bedroom. Once the little ones were settled, Amanda returned to the living room, carrying a couple of glasses of wine and adorned in high heels and a delicate garment known as a babidol, which only enhanced her beauty. We settled on the couch and sipped our wine while Amanda whispered what she wanted me to do that night. She didn't want affection and love. No, she wanted hard, and I gladly gave her what she asked for. I exerted myself to the fullest, pouring every ounce of energy into the moment until I succumbed to a dreamless slumber. When I awoke on that Saturday morning, Amanda was already dressed, holding an envelope in her hands. "Time to wake up, dummy," she said abruptly. Where was the tender woman from the previous night? And why the sudden use of dummy? Confusion clouded my mind as I tried to make sense of the situation. "The kids are all dressed and ready to go to Mom and Dad's," she continued, her tone cold and detached. "That's where I'll be spending the weekend. You've got about 48 hours to pack up your belongings and get out of my house. Monday morning, a restraining order will be issued against you, citing mental cruelty and a propensity for violence if provoked. The divorce papers in this envelope will be filed at the same time." I was dumbfounded, struggling to comprehend this sudden turn of events. Summoning whatever courage I could muster, I managed to stammer, "What's happening? Why are you doing this?" "Simple, stupid," she retorted dismissively. "Simon has joined the bank as Dad's right-hand man, and we're getting married as soon as my divorce is finalized. We've been reconnecting for months, and now it's time to make it official." With those words, she delivered the final blow to my world. "Oh, and by the way," she added casually, "Simon can't have children, so he wants to adopt Jennifer and Oscar." With that, she slammed the door shut behind her, leaving me to grapple with the shattering pieces of my life. For the first 12 hours of that fateful weekend, I found myself immersed in the contents of the envelope, repeatedly digesting its implications. Amanda's demands were staggering. She didn't just seek possession of the house, she aimed to claim ownership of my business as well. According to the terms outlined, I could continue to operate the business, but my earnings would be reduced to minimum wage, even less than what my employees earned. She insisted on full custody of the children, with the requested child support exceeding any feasible income I could generate under her oppressive terms. Moreover, she had already drained most of our savings, leaving me with a pittance. Despite her anticipated higher earnings, she sought alimony from me, ignoring the gross inequity of our financial circumstances. While her car was titled in her name, mine was owned by the company, affording me a means of transportation as long as I remained employed. Faced with the harsh reality of my predicament, I resolved to take action. I reached out and secured a loan for a pickup truck and trailer, knowing that our mutual friends wouldn't be of much assistance. Desperate for support, I called upon a few old high school acquaintances who readily came to my aid. Together, we loaded the trailer with belongings that Amanda was unlikely to contest. With nowhere else to turn, I sought solace in the familiarity of my workplace. Having purchased the entire building the previous year to accommodate expansion, I discovered a small, neglected apartment on the second floor. Determined to make it my temporary refuge, I rolled up my sleeves and spent the entirety of Sunday cleaning and organizing. An air mattress served as my bed, while hand-me-down furniture and kitchenware provided by my friends offered some semblance of comfort. A modest microwave became my culinary companion, supplemented by a cooler filled with ice to keep my beers chilled until I could procure a refrigerator. Monday morning greeted me with stiffness and discomfort, a stark reminder of the perils of sleeping on an air mattress, an experience I wouldn't recommend except in dire emergencies. The shower offered no reprieve, with cold water cascading down due to the lack of hot water on the second floor. A meager tank provided the only source of warmth, relegated to the bathroom in the office downstairs. Despite my less than ideal circumstances, I managed to muster a semblance of presentability after a shave. Determined to seek legal counsel, I reached out to several local attorneys, only to be met with a chilling reception. It seemed my father-in-law had already tainted my reputation, spreading word of my perceived transgressions. No help was forthcoming, and any loans I might have relied upon were now at risk of being called in. With no time to secure representation from afar, I found myself in court that morning, standing alone and vulnerable. Judge James presided over the proceedings, and an uneasy feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. His close ties to the Butler family, evident from his frequent appearances at their events, coupled with the likelihood that his financial affairs were intertwined with Butler Federal Bank, did little to assuage my apprehension. The judge's first words were directed at me, his tone stern. "Mr. Edwards, why are you not represented by counsel?" "Your Honor, I humbly apologize," I responded, attempting to maintain composure. I was served with the papers by my wife on Saturday morning, leaving me little time to seek legal representation before today's hearing. Despite my efforts, no local attorney was willing to take my case. I respectfully request a continuance to seek counsel from outside the area. Denied, came the swift reply. I fail to comprehend your reasoning. According to the records, these papers were filed 3 weeks ago, and this court date was set accordingly. Furthermore, it's noted that you were served at your place of business on the same day by a deputy. You had ample opportunity to secure representation and submit the necessary financial documents. Your attempt to delay these proceedings is both flagrant and contemptible. Your Honor, I must protest and request that this be entered into the official court record, I exclaimed, desperation evident in my voice. I feel as though I'm being coerced into a settlement that overwhelmingly favors my wife, with the sole intent of destroying me rather than genuinely benefiting our children. As our earnings records are filed jointly, my wife should have been able to provide my financial standing, rendering the unreasonable request for child support baseless. Additionally, she has announced her intention to remarry immediately upon our divorce being finalized, rendering alimony unnecessary. The judge banged his gavel emphatically. "Silence. You, sir, are out of order. You've had ample time to respond to the summons." "I rule in favor of the plaintiff," he declared firmly, slamming the gavel down once more before abruptly exiting the chamber. I was left reeling, the reality of my situation sinking in with brutal force. In a matter of minutes, I was divorced, facing the prospect of limited access to my children, and my business had been stripped away. Glancing at my ex-wife, Amanda, I detected a flicker of guilt in her expression, quickly masked by a haughty stare. "You better get to work," she admonished coldly. "I don't pay you to sit around looking like someone just ruined your day." As hatred threatened to consume me, I forced myself to maintain composure, acutely aware of the watchful eye of the bailiff. It was clear he harbored no warmth toward me. Simon and Amanda's attorney rose from their seats, exiting the courtroom. I remained seated, biding my time. I couldn't afford to provide them with any ammunition that might land me in jail, a realization that dawned on me as a plausible goal of theirs. The bailiff approached me discreetly. "They should be out of the building by now," he whispered. "The other bailiffs are keeping watch, but you know the influence the Butlers wield in this town, even in the county. Get yourself a lawyer from the state capitol. That should put enough distance between you. We sympathize with your situation, but can't risk being implicated." I nodded in appreciation and thanked the bailiff for his discreet counsel. Stepping out of the courtroom, I couldn't shake the feeling of being scrutinized by the uniformed personnel lined up to observe my departure. Heading straight to the office, I was surprised to find that Amanda and Simon hadn't arrived ahead of me. Their overconfidence had played in my favor for once. Without delay, I ensured that all staff members were preoccupied with their tasks. Seizing the opportunity, I hastily drafted a check for cash and dispatched our secretary/bookkeeper to the bank with strict instructions. She was to explain that I would be out of town servicing distant clients and required cash for the trip. I chose not to visit the bank personally, anticipating potential obstruction. Unless a court order had explicitly transferred ownership of the business, the bank had no grounds to refuse the transaction. Such occurrences were not uncommon in small towns, where cash transactions were preferred over debit or credit cards to avoid the fees imposed by banks and credit companies. With my name still on the bank's signature card, I had the authority to withdraw the necessary funds. Aware that my credit and debit cards were rendered useless, I opted for the old-fashioned green bills adorned with the faces of deceased presidents. Although there was ample cash in the account to cover the upcoming payroll, I couldn't bear to see my staff suffer. Restraining myself, I withdrew only a modest sum, ensuring that they would be compensated. Additionally, I emptied the petty cash drawer, leaving behind an IO directed at my ex-wife and her new partner. Resigned to my newfound role as the defeated party, a burning desire for vengeance began to simmer within me. Amanda, Simon, and Wayne needed to face consequences for their actions. As for Wayne's involvement, it was clear to me that he was the mastermind behind the ordeal. Had it not been for his influence, I would have been served with the divorce papers earlier, securing the opportunity to enlist the help of a local attorney and receive a fair judgment from the court. But Wayne's disdain for me, coupled with Amanda's compliance, fueled their scheme to exact revenge. In the late afternoon, Amanda and Simon finally made their appearance at the office, ready to assume control. Presenting Dorothy, our secretary, with signed court documents showcasing the transfer of ownership to a new corporation, they'd relegated me to the role of a mere manager rather than an owner. Fortunately, they refrained from publicly announcing my diminished status and salary. With only Dorothy privy to the details necessary for processing payroll, the rest of the staff remained oblivious to the discrepancy in our earnings. Aware that Dorothy would likely inform the rest of the staff about the changes, I resolved to maintain business as usual, at least for the time being. When Amanda and Simon made their unwelcome appearance, I quickly concocted an excuse about attending to a client's urgent needs and swiftly departed. The last thing I needed was to risk violating the protection order and inadvertently play into their hands. Thankfully, the protection order only mandated that I stay 100 feet away from any of them. However, in our small town, such a distance might as well have banished me to a life under a bridge outside of town. After wrapping up work, I sought solace in one of the local bars, owned by a client of mine. Thanks to my efforts in computerizing his point-of-sale system, he could manage his operations efficiently. As I approached the bar, the owner greeted me with regret in his eyes. "I'm sorry, John, but I can't serve you," he said quietly, his voice tinged with sympathy. "Words out. Serving you, talking to you, or even being friendly could spell trouble with loan accelerations. You'll have to leave." Understanding the gravity of the situation, I nodded in acknowledgement. Aware of the blind spots in his security camera system, I discreetly made my way to the back door. Waiting for me outside was the owner, a 12-pack of my favorite beer in hand. "John, I'm sorry," he murmured, offering the gesture as a peace offering. "Hopefully, Butler will come to his senses and put an end to this nonsense." With that, he slipped back into the bar, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a small token of solidarity. I hugged the wall, making my way back to my desolate apartment. To my surprise, I found a used but functional mattress, box springs, and Hollywood frame propped against the back door. Relief washed over me. I wouldn't have to endure that airbed again. After icing down the beer, I maneuvered the bed up to my apartment and set it up. With the aid of 5 or 6 beers and a relatively comfortable bed, I enjoyed a better night's sleep. The following day, I headed to Mark's for groceries. However, as I approached the checkout lane, I was escorted out without my purchases. Mark himself appeared, expressing regret as he informed me of his inability to defy Wayne Butler's influence. "John, I like you and your family, but I can't go against Wayne," he explained. With a shove, he ushered me out, wearing a forced expression of anger to maintain appearances. That evening, I discovered all the groceries I had selected neatly packed in a wooden box with a padlock beside my back door. The key lay on the driver's side front tire of my car. As I attempted to move the box, I realized it was surprisingly heavy, its bottom reinforced with steel plates. It became evident that my mysterious benefactor had taken precautions to prevent theft. Though it wouldn't deter a determined individual, it served as a deterrent to the average passerby. Leaving the box outside, I ventured out of town for a couple of days to attend to other clients. A seed of an idea began to take root in my mind. Unable to procure what I needed locally, I stopped by a small out-of-town service station and purchased some small fuel cans, along with regular gasoline and diesel fuel. On each trip out of town, I diligently acquired a couple of key items necessary for my plan's execution. Meanwhile, Amanda and Simon intensified their efforts to torment me. I was compelled to change my phone number due to Amanda's incessant calls, only to have law enforcement officers visit me repeatedly, accusing me of violating the protection order. Despite proving that I never answered her calls, I endured their harassment, being told to quit messing around and leave each time. The situation escalated to the point where I couldn't even fuel up my car, a company vehicle, no less, without encountering trouble. I had to delegate the task to someone else just to ensure I could continue with my work. My scheme finally reached fruition when Butler Federal Bank began harassing my mother. She received countless calls urging her to take out a reverse mortgage, while the county claimed they hadn't received her tax payment. Upon contacting the tax office, I learned that Wayne Maines was exerting pressure on them to harass my mother. This was the last straw. Wayne had crossed the line. Unable to threaten my mother directly with a mortgage, he resorted to other means of harassment, causing her undue stress. I had had enough. With just a week to prepare, I knew my retaliation had to be swift and effective. I planned to strike in the dead of night, when only a few officers were on duty and likely dozing in their cruisers. In addition to plotting my revenge, I secured an old, dilapidated pickup truck from a farmer in a neighboring town, refraining from immediately registering it, as the plates were still valid for a few more months. The farmer discreetly stashed the vehicle behind an abandoned house about a mile outside of town, ensuring it remained hidden until I was ready to execute my plan. Under the shroud of nightfall, just after the town's businesses had all shuttered their doors, I initiated the plan. Before commencing, I meticulously ensured that each establishment was dark and deserted. While my intent was to cause minimal harm, there were a select few individuals whom I wouldn't mind seeing face some physical consequences. With resolve, I began by remotely disabling the fire alarm systems in the targeted businesses, all of which I had originally installed. I bypassed the hospital and the bank, as tampering with their systems could potentially violate federal laws. My first stop was the convenience store on the outskirts of town. With a swift blow from a brick, I shattered the glass door. Armed with a makeshift Molotov cocktail, created by combining diesel fuel and gasoline, I ignited the wick and hurled it inside, ensuring it caught a shelving unit to break the bottle upon entry. Across town, I repeated the same tactic at the other convenience store, the wails of approaching sirens marking the response of the volunteer fire department to the initial blaze. A smirk played on my lips. Wayne, who had maneuvered his way into becoming the volunteer fire chief and sat on the fire department's board of trustees, had always been obstinate about allocating funds for improvements. Tonight would serve as a reckoning for his short-sightedness. My next destination was the farm supply store, where the manager had always been a vile character, even before my own persecution began. There, I strategically deployed 3 Molotov cocktails at various points within the building, ensuring the fire could spread rapidly. Despite the sprinkler system activating, the lack of supplemental water from the overwhelmed fire department rendered it futile, allowing the flames to engulf the store unchecked. As the flames engulfed most of the commercial area in town, I placed a call to my former residence using a burner phone. Through the electronic voice changer I had acquired, I kept it brief and to the point. Disguised as Darth Vader, I warned Amanda about an arsonist and advised her to take herself and the kids to my mother's house for safety. From a discreet vantage point down the street, I observed as Amanda left about an hour later with the kids, heading towards her parents' lavish mansion. I anticipated her reaction, but she was in for a surprise. Taking my time, I ensured that my old house was ablaze before casually strolling a couple of blocks to my car. Upon Amanda's arrival at her parents' gated community, yes, our quaint town indeed boasted a gated enclave complete with security patrols, she was greeted with the sight of their home engulfed in flames, her mother standing outside in distress. It turned out that I had overseen the computer system for the gated community and their security company. Conveniently, the security patrol was occupied responding to a break-in alarm when the fire ignited. Later, I learned that Amanda and her mother lingered for a while before eventually retreating to my mother's house, as even the local motels were grappling with computer system issues and unable to accommodate guests. My final act was to park the company car at the office. With a calculated move, I tossed in my last Molotov and set the vehicle ablaze. Unbeknownst to Amanda, Simon, and her conniving father, I had terminated the insurance policies on both the building and the vehicles. I proceeded to the first fire scene, where the fire department was grappling with the blaze in an attempt to prevent further spread. Wayne stood nearby, adorned in his extravagant white fire gear and matching helmet, orchestrating the efforts of the somewhat inebriated crew. With the police occupied across town investigating the other fires, there was no one to impede my advance. Due to Wayne's refusal to cooperate and his deliberate efforts to alienate neighboring departments, no additional fire departments were en route to offer assistance. The consequences of his actions were catching up to him now. Approaching Wayne from behind, I utilized the voice changer once more. Placing a small dowel against his back, I delivered the message as Darth Vader. Do not turn or make any sudden movements, or you may face severe consequences. Wayne froze, about to protest, but I silenced him. Shut up and listen. Your town is burning down, and unless you mend your ways, further consequences will follow. No one is immune to retribution, not even your own home, which is now engulfed in flames. Heed this warning and change your behavior. Ensuring he remained immobilized, I gave him a forceful shove, causing him to land in a muddy puddle. His pristine white gear was now thoroughly soiled, much to his dismay. As he attempted to rise, I nudged him back down with my foot, leaving him with a face full of mud and water. With that, I departed, vanishing into the onlookers gathered to witness the futile firefighting efforts. Making my way to the concealed pickup, I drove out of the vicinity, keeping a safe distance. I knew that despite the corruption, an incident of this magnitude would prompt at least some investigation, and had fully expected to come under suspicion. I relocated to a bustling metropolitan area, 3 states away from my hometown. There was no attempt on my part to conceal my identity or establish a new persona. Frankly, I didn't see the point. My access to my children had been severed. They were now under Simon's care. Financially, I was destitute, unable to provide child support or alimony. With law enforcement likely on my trail, I refrained from launching a new business endeavor. Instead, I secured a position in the 8 field, a familiar domain where I resumed my previous line of work. I exercised caution, even driving considerable distances from my apartment to make phone calls using a burner phone, driven by my paranoia of being tracked. As it turned out, my apprehension may have been unnecessary. When I finally reached out to my mother, she greeted me with relief, eager to share the latest developments in our hometown. Firstly, I'm relieved to hear from you. Initially, there were concerns that you might have been inside the apartment during the fire, but no evidence of your remains was found. Eventually, speculation arose that you had left town after leaving a resignation letter for Amanda and Simon, which likely perished in the fire. Thanks for reaching out promptly to let us know you're alive. Secondly, Amanda and Simon's marriage didn't come to fruition. It transpired that Simon was already married in another state and hadn't finalized his divorce. Amanda and the children stayed with me until she could secure a new residence, which ironically is smaller than your former home. Lastly, the aftermath of the fires revealed a tangled web. Many of the businesses and homes affected were insured through the bank's insurance agency. The substantial claims incurred prompted the insurance company to sever ties with the agency. Upon investigating, they discovered that Wayne Butler, as fire chief, had impeded the adoption of modern firefighting practices and neglected to establish necessary mutual aid agreements. Consequently, the insurance company is pursuing legal action against Wayne for his role in the calamitous losses. Additionally, a new bank has established a presence in our town, and many of the businesses affected by the fires have secured loans from this institution, denting the profits of Butler Federal Bank. Unbeknownst to me, Butler Federal Bank had a board of directors who are displeased with Wayne's management. He's currently under close scrutiny. Furthermore, since Amanda's marriage plans with Simon fell through, she has rescinded the protection order and is eager to reconnect with you. Moreover, the children remain legally yours. Amanda has petitioned the judge for modifications to the divorce proceedings, as the finalization hadn't reached the 90-day mark. It's possible you're still legally married. The kids continue to inquire about you daily when they visit here after school. In a surprising turn of events, it came to light that Judge James had a collection of cars, a fact he had kept under wraps until that night. Unfortunately for him, the collection was destroyed in the fires. Rumor has it that Wayne, in an attempt to minimize expenses, only insured the cars with basic liability coverage. As a result, the judge suffered significant financial losses, leading to a notable change in his demeanor towards Wayne Butler. We're currently in the process of searching for a new police chief, as the sheriff has decided not to seek re-election, leading to several resignations among deputies and officers. Amanda's parents are in a predicament, seeking a place to live after their house was completely destroyed. Unfortunately, finding suitable temporary accommodation is proving difficult, and the prospect of rebuilding their home seems uncertain due to a lack of willing builders. Amanda even approached me about selling or renting them my house, but I couldn't bring myself to trust them given their past treatment of my son. Wayne tried to assert himself, but his legal troubles have weakened his influence, and even the tax assessor refused to bend to his demands. Interestingly, my missing tax payment magically reappeared after that night, coinciding with some unexpected fiery mishaps involving the assessor's vehicles. It appears that Wayne's grip on power is loosening, and many are relieved by the prospect of change. It seems the fires have left most people unperturbed, with many viewing them as a cleansing force. However, the affected business owners and Wayne Butler are understandably distressed. "Well, it looks like I'll have to plan a visit home very soon," I replied with a chuckle. "But I might need to arrange for a more reliable vehicle first. My old ride barely made it here. I'll see you soon, Mom." Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you liked it, please like it and subscribe to the channel. See you soon.